Hello, wine friends. Welcome to Honest Wine Talk. I'm your host, Herim, and I'll guide you through the world's wine stories. Join us as we explore expert insights and tales straight from the vineyard. Here's to sharing the spirit of wine, one story at a time. Hi guys, welcome to Honest Wine Talk today. A few days ago in Seoul, we had a pleasure in welcoming Jason Haas from Tablas Creek, and he was showcasing his wines at a trade tasting event organized by Paso Wines and California Wine Institute. So I'd like to introduce Jason to you guys and learn a little bit about his wines today. Welcome, Jason. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Jason Haas. I'm a second generation proprietor and general manager at Tablas Creek Vineyard in Paso Robles, California. We are one of the pioneers of the California Rhone movement, and we've been here in Paso since 1989.
Right. So have you always been making Rhone variety wines, or has there been any changes from the day that you founded the winery?
So we have always been making Rhones, and really we created the winery to do this. We had the idea for what we wanted to make before we actually had the land. And the backstory of Tablas Creek is that it's a partnership. It has been since the beginning, equally owned and run by two families. One of the families is my family. My dad was an American importer of mostly French wines. The other family is one of the families whose wines my dad imported. So this is the Pairings family from Château de Castel in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So the idea for Tablas Creek came out of their trips to California that they made together to sell their French wines, and the belief that they came to that in this Mediterranean climate, the grapes that they knew and loved from the south of France should do really well.
That's really interesting. So there was a vision from the day one that you wanted to make wine that's similar to, could you say that the wine is similar to Castel wines, or is there something completely unique, but taking some ideas from Castel?
Yes to both of those questions. So I think if people are familiar with Châteauneuf-du-Pape, that's going to give them a good idea, a good starting point for what we do. But I also don't think that there's much value in trying to make a copy of a wine from someplace else. I think of it more as being like an artist's use of a particular color palette. The same thing with the particular grapes that we choose to use, but the way that we put them together and the way that they reflect the land that they're planted in is always going to have its own uniqueness, or else there's really, like, what's the point?
Right. I agree. So then what would you say is that the difference that wines made in Paso Robles compared to Castel? What are the errors and, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more similarities than differences. I think, again, if people know those wines and try ours, I think they'll taste a kinship. But the climate here is not the same as it is in the Southern Rhone. It's broadly similar, but it's more extreme here. So it's sunnier year round. It's hotter during the day in the summer, but it's colder at night. And the expression of the minerality from the soils here is a little more intense because the highly calcareous kind of limestone soils are right up at the surface, whereas in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, they're there, but you got to go down 4 to 6 feet to find them. So you end up with a little more brightness and a little more kind of this sort of salty minerality that I think you get from those soils here. And you get this lovely purity of fruit from all of the days of sun and the cold nights. So you have this little more primary character of the wines here, whereas in the Rhone, you have a little more of the kind of earthy, loamy character that I think people, that like the garrigue, that wild herbs that people associate with the Rhone. But as the wines age, one of the fascinating things is that they're at their most different when they're young, then they age closer and closer together over time.
Oh, that's interesting. So how many years should we age to see that kind of similarities over time?
I find that it starts to be pretty dramatic at kind of 8 to 10 years. They start to really converge. And these are, in general, these are wines that will go out 20 years or more. So you're not really risking that you might have kept them too long.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Paso wines, as far as I understand, they're the wines that can be drunk really young as well as they can age. So, would you say that your wines benefit a lot more by aging, or is that something that you can enjoy as soon as you buy them, pop it, drink it? What would you advise to the consumers?
I am a real believer that for a wine to be good when it's aged, it has to still be good when it's young. It's
Mm,
not like a wine becomes good suddenly with aging.
mm,
The balance of the flavors changes. You get a little more expression of some of those secondary things, like again, the kind of earth and loam and meat. Those, at least in red wines, those come out more, and then you get a little more kind of nutty, caramelly character on the whites as they age.
mm.
But it's really, I'm a skeptic of drinking windows that say drink this wine between 2032 and 2035, because I think the fascinating thing about wine is that it is alive and it does change every year, every month. It's a little different than it was the year before. So I think I think you absolutely can open and enjoy the wines when they're young. But that if you choose to wait, you'll get just a different mix and a little additional complexity and nuance that wasn't there when it's young.
So we'll have to buy every year many, many bottles so we can drink some every year to compare.
That's
Might be fun,
honestly,
right?
that's more and more as I have gotten a little older, a little more experienced in my wine collecting. That's one of the conclusions that I've come to, is that I shouldn't be so scattershot. I shouldn't buy one or two bottles of a bunch of different things, or at least not things that I want to age. I mean, it's great to buy something if I'm going to open it in the short term, but anything that I want to age, I need to have at least 6 bottles up, because I want to see what it's like over time, and then still have a few bottles left when I've aged it for however long it happens to be. And I say, this is magnificent.
Right, right. That's the saddest thing when you finish the bottle of wine that you bought and you have no more of it. And that's the tearing moment. All right. So you talked a little bit also about the region. Could you tell us a little bit more about Paso Robles region in general and where Tablas Creek is situated, and your approach to winemaking as well?
Okay, I'll tackle the region first. So the Paso is in the central coast of California. So if you're looking at a map, it's almost exactly halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And it's separated from the Pacific Ocean by one range of mountains. So we're close to the coast, but we're not actually on the water. So as where Tablas Creek is, sort of at the western edges of the Paso Robles AVA, we're about 15 kilometers from the ocean. But in between us and the ocean is a range of mountains that's about 1,000 meters high. So Paso is really a semi-coastal region where you have a lot of indirect influence of that cold Pacific Ocean, but not a lot of the direct influence you might find in a region like Carneros or the Santa Maria Valley or the Petaluma Gap. So we don't get fog very often. It doesn't stay kind of cool and 70s during the day. In the summer, it heats up. Um, that said, there's a lot of diversity within Paso. There are elevations from 250 meters to 600 meters. There's distances from the ocean from a little more than 10 kilometers to almost 70 kilometers from the ocean. There are temperature differences of sometimes 15 or 20 degrees Fahrenheit in a given day. And there's a bunch of different soil types. We happen to be on this very calcareous layer, which you mostly find west of town and south of town. But there are sandy loam soils, there are gravelly soils, and there are all sorts of mixes of those things. So it's a region that shares a warm, sunny climate. It shares a big temperature swing between day and night, and it shares a very long growing season, which combined with the cool nights means that you can get long hang times and keep really some very late ripening grapes on the vine and in good shape, even if you need to wait into November to pick them.
I see.
In terms of our own approach, we're pretty traditional in our winemaking. Again, we inherit the basics of our approach from what they do at Castel. And it starts with farming the vineyard organically and biodynamically. So trying to make sure that we allow maximum possible expression of the soils on the wines, and really working to farm our soils as much as we are to farm the vines themselves. So if we have healthy soils with lots of organic matter and lots of life in them, then that's going to be able to give the vines the nutrients that they need, the water that they need, the complexity that they do well with. And then beyond that, we pick each variety separately. Everything's picked by hand. We'll do multiple passes through each vineyard block, picking just what's right, leaving what might not quite be ripe for another week or 10 days or 2 weeks, and then coming back and doing a second and sometimes even a third or a fourth pass.
Right.
Then everything is fermented entirely with native yeasts. We believe that those wild yeasts are another part of our terroir. And then we blend. So we are a blending house. About 80% of the wine that we bottle is a blend, as you would probably expect if you're familiar with Châteauneuf du Pape. And our winemaking tends also to be pretty hands-off. We don't use much in the way of new oak. We're not adding enzymes or nutrients. We're basically letting the grapes become the wines that we feel like they want to be, and then asserting our own vision over them when we put our blends together in the spring 6 months later.
I see. So, one of the things that I've learned about your winery is, as far as to sustainable and organic winemaking, you guys are certified for Regenerative Organic certified, for the first time, the first winery in the world. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's something we're very proud of. That happened back in 2020.
Wow. So congratulations. And so I don't think a lot of people are familiar with this concept yet, or at least here. So could you tell us through what this is and how should we understand this as a wine drinker? How does it translate to our wine and the quality of wine?
Sure. And it's not just in Korea. I mean, it is new worldwide, and it is a worldwide certification. It's not just a California thing or an American thing. But so the idea behind regenerative farming is similar to what, if people know biodynamics, where you're creating an ecosystem that is in balance because it's got a diversity of different plant species and ideally animal species in there. You're looking very consciously to foster a healthy microbiome, so have healthy microorganisms and soil and worms and insects and all those things in the soil to keep it naturally fertile. That's the basis of regenerative farming as well. To that base, you're adding a move away from tilling. So instead of turning the soil over regularly, you're instead letting those soil networks continue to build, which builds the organic matter in the soil and allows the soil to both hold more moisture and hold its temperature better. It also means that your soils are holding more carbon. So your plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and through photosynthesis, putting it into the soil. And then regenerative farming is designed to keep that in the soil as much as possible. So you have a focus on using your farm unit to address some of the larger challenges that we know the world is facing, like climate change or resource scarcity or water availability. And then to those farming basics, there are really 3 other pillars that the regenerative organic certification covers. One of them is resource use. So you need to be working to reduce your dependence on shared resources like non-renewable energy and groundwater. So we're 100% solar powered. We're largely dry farmed, which means we use only a little bit of irrigation to get new vines established. And then once they're established, we've moved away from that. So we use 80% less water than the average California winery per acre. And then beyond that, there's an animal welfare component. So if you have a working animals on your farm, as we do, we have 275 sheep that graze the vineyard every winter, and they're a big piece of our soil fertility because they turn all that growing. They're essentially mobile composters. They turn all the growing cover crops and weeds into manure that nourishes the soil. But if you have working animals, they have to be treated well. You have to have an animal welfare certification. And then finally, there's a farm worker fairness component where you have to show that your farm workers are being trained properly and their working conditions are safe and that you're paying them a living wage for where you are. So it's a combination of purely kind of soil farming focused things and things that if people are familiar with, like the B Corp program, where you have a commitment that your business, your private business, has positive side effects on your people, on your community, and on the broader environment. This certification tries to encompass all of that.
Right. So it sounds like a really dedicated and a lot of work, and also sounds a bit expensive as well to all this winemaking. So where does this whole idea come from? Why did you guys decide to um go through all this as a winemaker?
So we were already farming organically and biodynamically, which we did because we felt that it was the right thing to do to make great wines and to make sure that our soils were as rich and fertile as possible, which translates into longer lived grapevines and grapevines that are less susceptible to things like heat spikes and droughts. So we felt like it was sort of our hedge against the challenges of climate change and just the challenges of being in a dry, hot, stressful climate anyway. So the move from that to regenerative organic basically came because it, for us, addressed the shortcomings that we felt there were in the pre-existing certification. So organics is great as far as it goes, but it doesn't really talk anything about your resource use. Um, you could be flood irrigating a water intensive crop in a desert climate and mistreating your workers. And the organic certification just doesn't care about that. That's not what it's focused on. And biodynamics, it's a really wonderful prescription for soil health. But if you've ever read the biodynamic literature, it's sort of inextricably tied up in this mystical language, kind of talking about activating cosmic energies and working in conjunction with the stars and moon and things that it's sort of hopelessly unscientific. And it was written 150 years ago, before there were worries about things like climate change or resource scarcity. So this felt to us like an updated version of the best certifications that didn't have the gaps in it that those certifications did, but had more rigor than many of the sustainability certifications that exist, which do look at everything from like biodiversity to your energy use, to your water use, to your farming, to how you treat people. But often the bar to entry for those is pretty low. So you don't even have to be farming organically. You could be spraying with Roundup and still get all these things sustainability certifications. So this was both broad and rigorous. And we felt like it just made all of the other pieces that we were thinking about all fall into place.
Right, sounds like a really strong commitment. And if consumers learn about all this, I think it'd be really good to create that kind of connection with your wine and to your land and to the people that are around and the animals. So basically the whole universe of Paso Robles and the wine actually kind of getting transferred into the bottle of wine. That's very, very interesting. And it's a great education as well for us to learn about how you guys make your wines. It's not just about making and selling them. So this is really interesting to learn. So I want to move on a little bit from winemaking to your varieties. So you briefly talked about earlier that you make wine with Rhone varieties. So could you talk to us about the decision to focus on these grapes and how you select the blends for each of your wines?
Sure. So our decision our decision again comes from our partnership with the Pairings at Castel, and they're famous for using all 13 of the Chateauneuf-du-Pape grape varieties in their vineyard. It's one of the things that sets them apart from most other Chateauneuf-du-Pape producers. So when we started, we brought in 8 grape varieties that are the core ones that they use at their vineyard. And that included some relatively famous ones like Grenache and Syrah and Roussanne, but it also included some that had never been used in America before, like Counoise and Grenache Blanc. And we were really impressed with how well some of those more trace varieties, more obscure varieties from France did in Paso Robles, to the point that in 2003, we decided we wanted all the rest of the varieties, even the really rare ones that there are only an acre or two of in France. So we brought in all of those as well. We now have all of them in production at the vineyard. And I think there are 8 of those grapes that we introduced into North America that had never been used here before. And so we do try when we can to bottle those, particularly the obscure ones, on their own so people can try them. In many cases, nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever tried them. But these are grapes which almost all shine in blends because they bring something to the blend that maybe the lead varieties don't. So you think of like Grenache and Syrah and Mourvedre are the 3 lead red grapes, and Grenache is very fruity and spicy and good acid and very outgoing. Syrah is dark and tannic and rich and kind of minerally, and Mourvedre is earthy, loamy, meaty, red fruited, chocolatey. And the things that, I mean, those fit very neatly together. They have they each have their own strength. But if you look at a grape like Counoise, it is bright, brambly, a little bit wild, spicy, high in acid, and low in alcohol. So it helps moderate the others and bring out this kind of freshness and spice element. So what we're always trying to do in putting our wines together, and this is true whether it's reds or whites or our rosé, is we're looking for balance. We're looking for complexity. We're looking for different flavors that will come out depending on the temperature that the wine is served, or how long the bottle has been open, or how long it's been aged in people's cellar. And we feel like each of these grapes, it brings a different aspect to the blend, and getting a chance to put together a collection in which they all play a role is one of the most fun things that we get to do.
But yeah, that's really interesting. I remember at the tasting event, we were tasting some of your white wines, and I remember one journalist commented that this wine tastes just like Rhone white wine. So yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about the white wine that you have?
Sure. So people probably don't know the whites from the Rhone Valley as well as they know the reds, and that's absolutely makes sense because more than 90% of the grapes planted in the Rhone Valley are red. So whites have not historically been a huge piece of most of the Southern Rhone's mix, but the grapes that evolved there are lovely. So you have everything from these very rich, kind of textured, honeyed white grapes like Roussanne and Marsanne. You have a very floral, kind of stone fruit, peachy white grape in Viognier. And then you've got some very bright grapes that are sort of lemon, citrus, rocks, minerality, like Picpoul and Picardin. And then you've got grapes which sort of sit in the middle that have a lot of texture, but also bright acid, like Grenache Blanc and Bourblanc. So white wines from the Rhone are actually more diverse than red wines from the Rhone, because most red wines from the Rhone are mostly Grenache or sometimes led by Syrah. Whereas the whites from the Rhone could be based on any of like 5 or 6 different grapes, and you don't know unless you know the producer. So at Tablas Creek, we do 3 different white Rhone blends, one each based on Roussanne, on Viognier, and on Grenache Blanc. And into those lead grapes, we try to blend as much of the higher acid varieties or the more floral varieties or the more textured varieties so that we have richness and brightness. We've got texture and minerality, and we've got fruit, but also non-fruit elements. So it's I love the whites from the Rhone. I think you'll see a lot more of them around the world in coming years because these are white grapes that evolved in warm, sunny places and are generally more adaptable to a warmer, drier climate than maybe the more famous whites like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc are. And they've turned out to be really good here. Our initial idea was that we were going to be maybe 85% red and 15% white. And the whites have been so good that we're now up to 35% of our production being whites.
Oh, wow. So do you sell most of your wines in America, or do you have a big export market at the moment?
We do sell most of our wines in America. We sell about 90% of what we make is domestic. And that's actually pretty normal for an American winery because America is a big wine producing country, but it's an even larger wine consuming country. So it's a country where the American market could absorb all of the wine made in America and still be a major importer. So choosing to export is it's not an unusual thing to do, but it's not usually a huge focus for most American wineries. But we feel like if we want to be a winery with kind of a national, international reputation, it's important to have our wines in key markets around the world.
Right.
So
Where do we find your wines at the moment around the world?
So our biggest export market is the UK. That's our largest, and then you can find them in kind of a couple of other regions. So around Northern Europe, you can find them in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, in most of the Scandinavian countries, and in Denmark. You can find them in Asia, in South Korea, in Japan, and in Singapore. And then a few scattered other places like Australia, like Canada and Mexico, a little bit in Brazil, a little bit in some of the Caribbean islands. Those are the main ones.
Yeah, there are a lot of countries you can find your wines. I mean, it's really good to know. As anywhere we travel, like, it seems like we can find your wine. But I'm a bit curious about how your wine is perceived in America because I'm not sure how people are familiar with Rhone blends in general, for American consumers. So yeah, how is it perceived in your domestic market and what have been the challenges? Could you walk us through your market situation in America?
Sure. So in the early years of Tablas Creek, you have to remember that America is a fairly young wine drinking country. It was not much of a wine drinking culture until the 80s. And so if you'd ask the average American wine drinker to name all the grape varieties they could think of, even a decade ago or 2 decades ago, they might get to like 5 and then stall out. But it's become a lot more diverse and a lot more open in the last 10 or 15 years. And a lot of that is thanks to the advocacy of groups like the Rhone Rangers, which is a group dedicated to the producers of Rhone varieties in America. There's now over 1,000 Rhone producing wineries in the United States. Most of them are relatively small. I mean, we're one of the larger ones at about 30,000 cases a year, and that's tiny compared to the big producers who might make 1 million or 2 or 10 million cases of Cabernet. But the combination of the increasing familiarity and access that people have to wine country around America, the fact that these grapes really do very well in a lot of the warmer climates here, and just the growth in sophistication of the American wine market means that now there's a real community who's grown up around these sorts of wines and knows and loves them.
Oh, I see. And your wines, how much do they retail at usually?
Our wines retail for between $28 and $70 in the United States. So
Okay.
they're not bargain prices, but they're also not among the most expensive wines by any stretch.
I see. Okay. So in what ways does Tablas Creek engage with a local community in Paso Robles, and the broader wine industry to promote your sustainability and quality winemaking?
That's a great question. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. The one of the advantages that we have, or that we choose to use, is that there are organizations within the world of wine for almost everything. So, for example, it was through the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance that we recently got involved in that California Wine Institute tour of Japan and South Korea. And that local organization, which is dedicated to and really run by the local wine producing community, is able to aggregate all of our efforts and energy and come up and create this kind of coordinated campaign that we would never be able to do ourselves. So we've been members of that organization since we started. I've served several terms on the Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance board of directors. In a similar way, we're members of the Rhone Rangers. I've been on that board of directors for almost 20 years. We participate in events like the Hospice du Rhone, which is another Rhone-focused event. So we try to get involved with the organizations that are in a position to advocate for the kinds of wines that we make. And that also is true in terms of sustainability. We're very active with the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and with the events that celebrate organic farming or biodynamic farming or regenerative farming in California. So a lot of what we do is kind of this community marketing the categories that we're a part of, as much as it is just ourselves.
Right. So yeah, I mean, when you guys came, there was this really great community feel that you guys are helping each other to make better wines and more quality wines together, not competing individually. So that was really beautiful to see. But
Wine is not a zero sum product. It's not like buying a car where if I buy a Toyota, I'm not also buying a Volvo. Um, Wine is different. If somebody buys a bottle of our neighbor's Syrah, they're not less likely to buy a bottle of our Syrah. They're more likely to. Same thing if somebody buys a bottle of biodynamically farmed wine from Oregon. Like, does that make them less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek? No, it doesn't. It's actually, you can market together with other producers who are from your region or who are a part of one of your categories without it feeling like you're somehow undercutting your own success.
yeah, that's a really healthy way of looking at it. Yeah, so I'm curious how Paso Robles' reputation before and now. So you guys have been doing this great work to put the names out there as a region and the wineries individually as well. So internationally or domestically, I'm curious where Paso Robles stand as a wine region now.
So let me take you back 20 years. So when I was starting out at Tablas Creek, I would go around the United States and work with our distributors in different markets or do tastings in different places. And I would say that we're from Paso Robles. And even the people in the business would sort of get this puzzled look on their face and say, "Oh, Paso Robles, what part of Napa is that in?" Um, and I'd have to explain, so we're not in Napa. This is a different region. We're south of San Francisco. And I think in the last decade, domestically, Paso has really started to come into its own. I mean, it's had a Wine Spectator #1 wine of the year. It's been the wine region of the year and the Wine Enthusiast. It's been the subject of articles in every major wine magazine, reviewer publication. So I think it's now established as probably the third most recognized region in California after Napa and Sonoma. Internationally, I think we're still a few years behind that in recognition, which is why like tours like this recent one are so important, because Napa casts such a big shadow out there internationally that it's important to remind people that it only represents 4% of the wine made in California, and that there are these amazing and dynamic regions that are in other wonderful parts of California.
Right, that's always mind-blowing to know that only 4% is made in Napa. It feels like 110%.
It sometimes does, I agree.
Right, right. But yeah, I think it was a great exposure in Seoul. I think there was a lot of talks about how exciting to have Paso Robles in Seoul and meet you guys, meet the winemakers, meet the wine owners. Yeah, I think it created such a buzz, and I hope to see your wines in Seoul a lot more, and people get to talk about your wines a bit more, because it's interesting, especially Rhone variety. They're very, very interesting. Um, yeah. So how do you feel about being in Osaka, Tokyo, and Seoul? I'm sure the audiences are a little bit different in their interest in their wines, what kind of wines they want to buy. Yeah. So how was your experience with a trade event with California Wine Institute in three different cities?
I thought that the interest in all three cities was really high. Uh, and we did trade events in all three cities. We did events for local journalists in all three cities. I thought it was great. I would say that the level of interest was extremely high. The level of pre-existing knowledge about Paso Robles was often pretty low, which just suggests that that's kind of the perfect time for us to be out and doing this. And it's the kind of thing that would be very difficult for us to organize on our own. So the fact that we can kind of piggyback on the work that the Wine Institute is doing, and the fact that they chose to feature Paso as their featured region on this tour gave us the opportunity to kind of step in and take it to the next level in terms of education.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm always very excited to host these events. We had last year we had Sonoma, and this year we had Paso Robles. Excited to see what's coming next, but we definitely thoroughly enjoyed the wines made in Paso Robles this year. Right, so back to your winery, Tablas Creek. So could you highlight a few wines from your portfolio that you believe uniquely represent Tablas Creek and share what makes them special?
Sure. So our flagship wines, both red and white, we call Esprit de Tablas. So we have the Esprit de Tablas, which is the red, and the Esprit de Tablas Blanc, which is the white. Those are the wines that we model most closely on the Castel Chateauneuf du Pape red and white. So the red is based on Mourvedre, the white is based on Roussanne. And each wine incorporates roughly the top 15% of what comes into the cellar for the vintage. So it's our pick of the best of the best. The blend will change a bit every year, though it always has the same lead grapes. But our goal with these is to share the best of the vintage. So those, if people want our flagships, those are the wines to look for. Those are also probably the most age-worthy wines that we make that could be laid down and cellared for 2 decades easily.
Hmm.
The other wines that I'd love to highlight are the Patelin de Tablas wines. Those are generally the least expensive wines that we make. And they are really all about the grape varieties that have kind of surprised us with how good they've been in Paso Robles. So the white is based on Grenache Blanc, which is one of the obscure grapes that had never been planted in California before we started, and which has turned out to just be a superstar here, where it has lovely texture and this beautiful kind of green apple or kind of grapefruit, citrus fruit. Both bright and rich, lovely as the base of a blend, also good on its own. So the Patelin de Tablas Blanc is a real treat. I think that was one of the favorites at the tasting. And then the Patelin de Tablas Rouge is based on Syrah with Grenache and Mourvedre and Counoise. And it's kind of a little more of a profile, more like what someone might find in the Northern Rhone because it's led by Syrah, but it still has about half of those Southern Rhone grape varieties. So you've got sort of one foot in this black fruited, mineral driven Northern Rhone and one foot in the more red fruited, spice and earth driven Southern Rhone. And I think those wines are great places for people to start if they maybe haven't had a Tablas Creek before. And those are wines that are meant to be delicious from the moment that they're bottled, and they still have a decent aging horizon, but we're talking more 5 to 10 years rather than 20 years or more.
Right. Then what kind of food shall we pair with?
So, traditional Mediterranean dishes are kind of a slam dunk, but one of the things that I love about Rhone wines in general is that they have such complexity of flavor that they do well with a lot of things that, say, your Chardonnays and your Cabernets don't. For example, both the white and the red Rhones are beautiful with spice. So seafood cooked with spice, whether that's chili or whether that's ginger. I mean, those are beautiful with Rhone whites. Reds, all sorts of stir fries, all sorts of braised braised red meats are beautiful with Rhone reds. Um, and then you have, of course, the Rhone rosés, which I know is still just a small category in both Japan and Korea, but is the rosé, the kind of Provence style, Southern French style rosés are a huge category around the world and still growing fast. And those wines are good with everything from fried chicken to a charcuterie plate, or just to sit outside and have a glass on a sunny day.
That's exciting to hear because Korea is a fried chicken nation. So,
That's honestly one of my absolute favorite pairings for dry rosé is dry rosé and fried chicken.
also, I'll spread some word. Everyone will
Please.
try your rosé. Do we have your rosé in South Korea?
Not yet, but
Not
hopefully,
yet.
hopefully in coming years.
Yes, I hope so because, we eat a lot of fried chicken here, so it'd be great to experience your rosé with it. Right. So, your recent trip to South Korea, we mentioned in this talk a few times. So I'm curious to hear about what are your expectations from Korean consumers, and what do you think about Korea as one of your markets?
So it's been a very good market for us. If you average the last, whatever, 5 years or so, I think it's been our number three market after the UK and Canada. So um, I think the base is already pretty strong. And a lot of that is thanks to the great team that we have. We work with Shindong Wine in Korea, and they've been terrific. So hopefully with the work that I did when I was there with them, that'll just help make their job a little bit easier. I found that there was a really pretty sophisticated knowledge of Chateauneuf du Pape among Korean consumers that I spoke with, and certainly among the trade. And so I think this is a pretty good bridge for people who might know what a CDP tastes like, and be interested in California. And this is sort of the two where the two meet. So I'm hoping that we'll see growth on both the red and the white side, and maybe that'll be the toehold for people. That'll be the starting point, is their love of Chateauneuf.
Mm, yeah, that's true. There's the Chateauneuf du Pape has been one of the most popular wines to try when you get into wine. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to introduce your wine as a bridge. All right. So I have my last question for you. So I know you just got back to the US. What was the first glass of wine that you missed the most that you had to have when you got home?
um, it's interesting. I have not yet had a glass of wine since I got home. I only got home yesterday evening, and we went out for tacos last night, and I had beer. So,
Right. Okay.
so
Okay.
we're going to be cooking kind of a Middle Eastern style kind of chicken and rice dish tonight, which I think I'm gonna open a bottle of rosé and have it with that. And I did get to have that when I was in Korea, so maybe that'll be my first go-to since I got home.
Right, that's great. So I don't think you told us about rosé actually. So what are the great varieties that you make rosé with, and what kind of flavors can we expect?
So we do two rosés, and they mirror the two main traditions of rosé in the south of France. So we do one rosé which is very Provençal in style, so pale in color, mostly Grenache, made more or less like a white wine with very little in the way of skin contact, and that's very much that kind of bright toned strawberry and like mandarin fruit, lots of minerality, bright acid, dry. And then we do a richer rosé, which is sort of a hybrid between the traditions of Bandol and Tavel, which is based on Mourvedre and has a little more skin time. It's a little deeper in color. It's a little more textured. And that's more of a kind of plum and watermelon kind of flavors. Again, richer texture, good with a little more substantial food, also really good with spice. And those are the two that we do.
They sound so good. I can't wait to try your rosés as well. So just for the last thing, do you have anything to say to people who's never tried your wine? What would you like to say to them, or to your fans as well, fan of your wines too? What would you say to your consumers?
So if for the consumers who are fans of Tablas Creek, thank you. We're always honored to see people who have followed us for years. For people who have not, if you'd like to get a little sense of who we are and what we do, I encourage people to check out the blog that we've written for 15 years. We dive into everything from winemaking to grape growing to the business of wine to the collecting of wine to the community of wine. And we try to share as much as we can over social media as well. If you want to get a sense of what our world looks like, what the vineyard, how the vineyard changes from season to season, who the people are who are involved in this. We're at Tablas Creek at all of the major social media platforms, and I think we try really hard to share content that's not promotional, but is instead hopefully fascinating, and will give people a window into our world.
Oh yeah, that's really great. So do you have your cellar door open? Do you have access to your winery?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're open every day. I mean, with whatever, a few holidays accepted, but we're open 7 days a week. We're the tasting room is at the winery, so you can come and see the vineyard, see the flock of sheep, see the winemaking as you taste the wines. But yeah, we're open in our little piece of paradise, 10 miles west of Paso Robles every day.
Did you have alpacas as well?
We do. We have one alpaca. His name is Paco. He's sort of the lookout for the flock. He's designed. I mean, alpacas tend to look up. Their necks look up, unlike sheep who all look down. So the idea in getting alpacas was that they would be not necessarily guard the flock of sheep, but alert the flock of sheep if there was danger nearby. I'm not sure that actually ever worked, but the alpaca is very cute, so it's okay.
Oh, I can't wait to meet Paco. I hope I get to make a trip out there sometime and meet you and Paco together.
Absolutely. We'll make it happen.
Try some of your wines, yes. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It was a great pleasure to have you. We learned so much about Paso Robles and Tablas Creek, its own uniqueness, and your winemaking and your wines. So very excited to have you here today, and I hope that we'll have you again sometime.
Thank you, Harman. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.